Here we go again, reading Outlander Book 4, Drums of Autumn. I actually started it first thing this morning, I think technically a little before 6 a.m. So I am now around 100 pages into the book, which is only about 10%, probably less than 10% into the book. It's a big one. It's over 1,000 pages. So we're moving along. They're now in the New World in the Carolinas, trying to get to Jamie's relatives, the Camerons, who have a plantation called River Run, which I'm familiar with from the show and am excited for Aunt Jocasta to enter the scene. We also have Roger and Brianna in their kind of side story, which I'm sure will actually become more prominent, like them getting to know each other, knowing that the two of them have feelings for one another and all of that. But it is really just nice to be in the Outlander universe again with Jamie and Claire, who are as hot and steamy as ever, and just to really be part of that experience once again. I'm pretty confident I know the majority of what happens in this book because I have been watching the show every season since it first aired, so I don't know if there'll be a ton of surprises for me, but I'm still looking forward to it nonetheless because Jamie and Claire are my OTP, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's really all I have to report first thing. I will try to do better about giving you guys updates on what's happening in the book. But as of right now, Jamie and Claire, Fergus, Ian, and Duncan are all en route to River Run. They've met Stephen Bonnet, and basically Brianna and Roger are being cute and coy and are kissing. So that's about it for now, but I'll check in when I have a little bit more to actually disclose.
Hello, happy Sunday. It is Sunday. It is the Sunday of Labor Day weekend here in the US, and I decided I should give you guys an update on Drums of Autumn, which I've been reading basically for the last 3-4 days, and I am now 400 pages into the book. So essentially, I've been making it a goal of mine to read 100 pages a day because I figured if I do roughly that, I can almost complete all 3 novels this month. And if there are any days when I can read a little bit more, awesome, because that'll just make my life all that much easier. But I did figure I'd probably just check in every few hundred pages, or whenever something like big happens that I feel like is worth vlogging. But essentially, as I said, I am 400 pages into this. I still have like 600 and something odd pages to go, so basically another 2 novels to read in order to finish this book. But you have Jamie and Claire in North Carolina, you have them at River Run, we've met Aunt Jocasta, who I love. I also just happen to really love the actress that plays her in the TV show, but Aunt Jo has a special place in my heart. She is a force to be reckoned with as a Mackenzie, that's for sure. So we've met her, we've had interactions with Stephen Bonnet, who is basically the villain who replaces Jack Randall at this point. And you just really have a lot of like Jamie and Claire trying to navigate and find a place for themselves in this new world, because you have someone like Aunt Jocasta who wants to make Jamie her heir and have him run River Run, but he's hesitant to do that because he doesn't just kind of want to be Aunt Jo's like puppet, because she, as I said, is a very strong-willed individual, and he'd basically just be doing whatever she asks because she needs a man, like literally a front man, because she's a woman and can't do it herself. So he has that offer. He has Governor Tryon, who has offered him land to bring more able-bodied Scotsmen to like settle on, and so that's an option for them. And it's really just figuring out like, what do we do now? Like, we're not going back to Scotland currently, so what do we do? And there's a lot of steamy scenes, always a lot of steamy scenes with those two. But I do think right now what I'm really enjoying about the book is seeing Claire navigating these situations as a like modern woman. Like, let's be real, Claire is not a modern woman in the 21st century context necessarily, but she is fairly modern when the book started out in 1945, and she definitely is modern for like the 1960s as well. She is one of these people that broke the glass ceiling and is very independent minded. And like, to take her from like the 20th century modern sensibilities, transplanting her into the 18th century and having her have to grapple with things like slavery is really interesting. And I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that that I feel like a lot of historical fiction does is you have these historical fiction novels that are set in a particular time period, but then the character is so like so constructed from 21st century sensibilities that they almost feel like they could have been transplanted in the way Claire was. But that is part of the charm of these books. Like, that's part of the plot. She has actually been transplanted to centuries before she would have been born and has to deal with like these different ways of thought and thinking. Like, she is really opposed to slavery, obviously, and as someone who has a dear friend who is a black man in the 1960s, like, having slaves do things for her are really uncomfortable. There are also just like laws and ways that things are done that she does not like and does not agree with. And Jamie, who is from the 18th century, doesn't always understand why she's pushing back against it. And it's always interesting to see those moments where, for a lot of it, like, Claire fits in. She is able to assimilate into the 18th century. But then every once in a while you're reminded, oh yeah, she's not from these parts. And so that's been really interesting in seeing her, in particular with River Run and the slaves and different laws and that sort of thing. And it's one of those recurring sort of things that happen throughout the Outlander books, but I always really, really enjoy it. This book does feel like we're starting to also get more of what feels like a side story right now with Roger and Brianna in the 1960s. Like, there's a little romance happening there as well, which is really nice. And obviously I know what happens between the two of them because TV show, but that's also a nice sort of diversion at times. I would say that I'm not always as interested in their story in the 1960s as I am Jamie and Claire, but it's still nice. And I still like hearing about Brianna because obviously she's Claire and Jamie's daughter, so always a good time there. But so far, unsurprisingly, really enjoying the book. So I guess the next time you'll see me, I'll be a few more 100 pages in. Hopefully I'll be past the halfway point. We'll see. But I do feel like I'm getting through it. This like 100 pages a day thing is working for me. It doesn't take that long for me to get through the 100 pages, and I enjoy them, which is probably why it doesn't take me that long to get through them. But yeah, that's really all I've got. I will check back in the next time I have anything of note to report. But yes, enjoying it. Jamie and Claire, all the steam. What can I say?
Good morning. It is Wednesday after Labor Day, and I'm multitasking. I'm eating breakfast and trying to record a vlog update because I have a meeting at 9:30. Womp womp. Thankfully, not on camera. But I am officially 2/3 of the way through Drums of Autumn. I am on like page 706 or something like that, which means that I basically have a normal sized novel left, so 300 to 350 pages. So I'm making progress. Like, the reading 100 pages a day has been working for me, but oh my word, the amount of stuff that has happened since my last check-in. It's interesting because like the world is expanding, and the only way I can describe it is like to compare it to the TV show Game of Thrones. I can't compare it to the books because I've never read them. I actually attempted to read the first one and I got 50 pages in and was just like, no dog, ain't for me. But like, if you watched the TV show Game of Thrones before that horrible season that ended the show, basically for the first few seasons, the world was continuing to grow as you were introduced to other houses and their perspectives on who should be sitting in the Iron Throne type thing. And that's kind of the same expansion that we've seen in this book in particular, because I mean, if you think about it, like book one was all about Jamie and Claire, and then in book two you had a little bit more of what was happening in the 1960s, but not a ton of it, and it was still focused on Claire mostly. And then in Voyager you had a little bit more of the same, but now, if I've read 300 pages since the last check-in, a good chunk of that has been about Brianna and Roger, and Brianna and Roger as a couple. So you now have this other romantic relationship that is coming to the forefront, and I guess like kind of a younger version of Jamie and Claire, who are now both like 50-ish or a little bit older. So this might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't know that I like Roger all that much. I mean, part of me, and this is just a theory, so part of me thinks that he's meant to kind of be a foil to Jamie. Like, Jamie's an 18th century man, Roger is a 20th century man. Jamie is a Highland warrior, very physical in his like, just, he's a physical being. He's like, that's how he's described. He takes up a lot of room, let's put it that way. And he's a warrior, so his strength is a big part of his identity. And then you have Roger, who is a scholar. But Roger is really problematic to me. Like, for a 20th century man, he has some really like old-fashioned opinions about women that don't sit well with me. So like, for example, take Roger and Brianna kind of when they're getting kind of close, and Brianna says that she wants to sleep with him basically, and his first thing, if I remember rightly, is kind of to insinuate that she's a slut, which slut shaming is bad. Don't do it. But then he basically makes an argument that he wants her, but he's not going to have her unless they're married. Which, okay, fine, that's his stance. He was raised by a minister. He doesn't believe in like extramarital whatever. So fine. So they disperse. Then you find out that he discovers in like some newspaper clipping that Claire and Jamie die in a fire in 1776. And he doesn't tell Brianna. He keeps it a secret because he says he doesn't want her hurt. And I'm just like, so you keep the fact that her parents die a fiery death from her to protect her. You take away her like agency because you don't like how she will likely react, which is he thinks that she's going to go back in time and try to change things, which admittedly she does, but it's her choice and it's her parents. So like, you do what you gotta do. Then we get them, then he does something romantic. He goes through the stones in order to rescue Brianna, or rescue, because now she's gone back to the 18th century and he's worried for her. So he risks his neck to go back, and it's kind of romantic, fine. So they reunite in the new world. All of a sudden, this man who didn't want to sleep with her until they were married decides that, well, we're in the 18th century and there was this thing called hand fasting that couples used to do when they couldn't get to a minister. And you basically did that and you lived as husband and wife for a year and a day, I think, until you could find a minister. So he decides, well, we can do that instead of get married and then we can sleep together. That's suspicious. That's very suspicious. So I've had a lot of red flags for him. But during this whole interaction between the two of them, and it's Brianna's first time, like, you learn that Roger has had sex. So it's not necessarily that he's against having sex outside of wedlock. He just didn't think it was right for Brianna to have sex out of wedlock. Yet technically they are, because hand fasting is not marriage. It's just something that was a custom basically until you could get to a minister, because you might not have had ministers nearby. So then, in the middle of their hot, steamy, smutty moments, he is doing something and asks her if he's doing it right, and she says yes. And it's not a case of like, oh good, I'm giving her pleasure. It's, well, how does she know that I'm doing it right? And then when he finds out that she like had decided to like read up on sex, kind of like, I guess, a 1970s version of Cosmo, something called the sensuous man, in order to know what to do, he's like, well, he is thinking that women should be ignoramuses, is the word he uses, the exact word, when they go to their marriage bed. So he's not comfortable with her trying to educate herself on sex at all. And then there's more. This is a tangent. So, and then there is this like glib moment where he talks about like wife beaters and how like he could understand why. And I'm like, there isn't a scene in Outlander when Jamie beats Claire. He gives her a whooping. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I do know that he felt he needed to, because she had endangered the lives of like him and the other men. And beating anyone is not okay. But he's an 18th century man, and so it was commonplace and part of like what he would have grown up with. Not that it justifies it, but he's an 18th century man. Roger is a 20th century man and is making these remarks about wife beating because he's unhappy with like Brianna choosing to like go back into the 18th century to save her parents, and because she's wearing breeches, which is calling a lot of attention to her, type of thing. So there are a lot of red flags with him that I am not okay with and that I'm not comfortable with. And yeah, I don't know. And then, I mean, the thing is, too, like, the point I left off, basically, Brianna has found out that Roger knew her parents were going to die in 1776, and she's irate and runs off. But I'm just like, how many red flags do you need for a man? Like, he takes away her choice to save her parents because he doesn't like it. He feels that there's nothing she can do. And I mean, maybe that's true. I don't know. But it's her choice. It's her parents. He takes away her choice over her body because she's willing to give it to him. And he says no because we have to be married. And then any sort of knowledge or like anything about sex he gets weird about because he hasn't taught it to her. And it's just weird. For a 20th century man, he seems more cavemanish in a lot of ways than Jamie does. So I'm not a huge fan of his. Not a huge fan. Maybe that changes. But right now, I'm not Team Roger. Like, not at all. So anyway, that is my update, my long tangent on my thoughts on Roger Wakefield Mackenzie. But yeah, that's where I am with the book. As I said, 2/3 through, so I have a feeling I'll finish it by this weekend. If not Friday, then probably on Saturday, and can move on to the next book. So I'm making good time, but I am really, really nervous about keeping this momentum. Anyway, I should go to work. I'll chat with you later. Bye. Good morning. I only checked in yesterday, but I feel like so much has happened since I checked in yesterday in only like the span of 100 pages. And it always blows my mind because I am such a like character-driven story person, and there's so much action, so much plot driving Outlanders that normally this would not be the type of book that I am drawn to or that I particularly enjoy, but I'm well into book 4 in the series and love it. I mean, it's still, I don't know what that says about me or about Diana Gabaldon and these characters and the world that she's created, but this is not the story that I'm usually drawn to. And here I am nearing the end of book 4 with book 5 and 6 ready to go for this month, because trying to read 3 of them this month like the ridiculous person that I am. But yeah, it's not the book you would expect me to pick up, and yet I devour them every single time. And so yeah, I've only read 100 pages since yesterday, but like I said, so much has happened. We have Brianna reuniting with her parents, which was like this really, really sweet moment. I didn't cry when Jamie first met Brianna, although it was very, very sweet, but I think his shock tempered whatever like weepiness might have happened, and then also Claire's shock kind of tempered it too. But then when the two of them are just talking about children and they mention Faith, which is the daughter they lost in France, like weepy me returned. But yeah, so Brianna is now at Fraser's Ridge, and things have been happening. I will say though that there was definitely a bait and switch moment here, because I was reading and Brianna had this very, very brief interaction with Stephen Bonnet, and I know what happens in the TV show, and so I was bracing myself for that. And then the moment just passed, and I was just like, maybe that was something they added to the TV show that wasn't actually in the book. And I had like lulled myself into a false sense of security, and then bam, it comes at me, and it comes at me as a like flashback almost, because Brianna is telling her mother what has transpired. So we don't see it as it's happening. We hear about it basically 2 months later when Brianna is letting her mother know that she is pregnant and that she doesn't think Roger is the father. And so it was really interesting because I really thought that because of how things just kept moving along, we didn't hear anything about it. Most of the interactions we see with Brianna are really about Brianna and her father, Jamie, kind of getting to know each other and that sort of thing. So definitely lulled me into a false sense of security, and now I'm a little heartbroken because if you've seen the TV show, then you know that Brianna was raped by Stephen Bonnet, and I know that a lot of the criticism about the Outlander series, much like with the case of Game of Thrones, is the sexual violence that takes place. And I know that's one of the things that turned people off of book one, Jamie's sexual violence when he's raped. And now you have his daughter, who is also a rape survivor. But for me, I don't necessarily see either of those scenes as gratuitous. I'll be interested to see how this one continues to play out with Brianna, because up until this point, you really haven't heard her talk about her suffering because we didn't know it happened until literally a hot second ago. So it'll be interesting to see how she grapples with this. I mean, Claire and Jamie talk a little bit about it and how, like, the body heals but the soul doesn't, which I thought was a really interesting moment, talking about sexual assault and what the survivors have to contend with. So I'll be interested to see how this continues to evolve, because at this point now Brianna is 2 months along and Claire is already worried because she's telling Brianna, you need to go back through the stones before you have this child. So that's kind of where we are right now. But yeah, it was 100 pages of a lot of stuff happening with the reunions of the family, finding out this stuff about Brianna, finding out this stuff about Stephen Bonnet, finding out more about Roger. So yeah, it's just been it's been a lot, but I'm really enjoying this. I don't know what else to say about that, but for now, I'm gonna go eat a quick breakfast and then log into work. It is Thursday. I could not be happier that the weekend is almost upon us. I think I'm supposed to have a happy hour after work with my work mom today, which would be really nice. She has to respond to my text first so that I know we're still on, but that should be good. And if she isn't able to meet with me tonight, then we'll reschedule, and I have some writing that I could do. I also have some like videos that I want to plan out. So whatever happens tonight should be a nice, enjoyable one. Hello, greetings from the garden. I basically decided to come just sprawl out on our grass and get some fresh air. And I figured, why not give you guys an update since I happen to have my phone and nothing else to do. So I am so close to finishing with Drums of Autumn. I'm about, I want to say 165, 170 pages from the ending right now, which I feel like I'm making good time. Like I'm reading, as I said, roughly 100 pages a day, which I feel like is a good amount. Basically, what I'm trying to avoid is burnout. I don't want to like force myself to read hundreds of pages a day and then at the end of all of this really come to resent the Outlander series, or at the end of this basically go into October with a reading slump because I've just pushed myself too hard. Like, there's no reason to push myself. These are all self-made deadlines. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it. I would say that this is the first section, or the first time while reading Outlander, that I'm getting like serious historical romance vibes, if that makes any sense. Because although I'm not an expert on historical romance, I really just started exploring the genre itself. For me, historical romance is like historical light. You aren't reading it for facts or to learn anything. Like, the historical setting is really just like a prop, effectively. Like, it impacts like the social norms, it impacts the clothes and like the settings that people are in. But with Outlander, it's always been a book that felt so well researched that to me it was always historical fiction with romance as an element. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense to me. But this miscommunication trope that I know happens all the time in romance, from what I hear, it's here, and you just want to basically like clunk a bunch of people's heads together. Like, be adults, communicate, use your words. Like, so much trouble, so much drama could be avoided if only characters spoke to one another. Which is so frustrating, because I mean, it's a case of like, Brianna doesn't tell everyone everything. So like, Lizzie doesn't really know what's going on, but she remembers like Brianna coming back really agitated, having seen Roger with her prior to that, and she sees like evidence that they got it on. And so that's what she believes is her reality. Like, she believes in some way that this man has either taken advantage of Brianna or something of the sort. And then you have Brianna not necessarily telling her father everything, and that causes its own like set of worries and problems. But basically, because Jamie hasn't been told everything, he becomes like defensive daddy bear. And when Roger appears and is not using the name Wakefield as Jamie has been led to believe he would be using, he's using the name Mackenzie. When this man comes up and talks about Brianna, he like assumes that this is the man who hurt Brianna, because all he's going on is what Lizzie has told him based on the like bits and pieces that she's witnessed, and based on bits and pieces that like Roger himself has unwittingly shared. But it's like, all of this could have necessarily been avoided if at any time Brianna had mentioned that she was handfasted to Roger. Like, if that had come out earlier, like, I feel like it would have resolved all the issues, because Jamie might have believed what Roger said. He like it I don't even know how to put it into words, but it's just a lot of miscommunication that ends up like Jamie becomes protective dad and literally sells poor Roger to the Mohawks. It's a bit of an overreaction, but I think a father would probably do something of the sort if he thought that a man had hurt his daughter. So yeah, he comes out of this looking a bit like a numbskull, but it's not entirely his fault, because he doesn't have all of the information, which if he had all of the information, it might have not ended this way. But again, like, violence is not the answer, and him beating Roger to a bloody pulp and then shipping him off to the Mohawk, probably not a good look, Dad. Probably not a good look. And it's just, people use your words. Use your words, please. Please and thank you. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. As I said, 160 to 170 pages left to go, so I will definitely finish that and then move on to book 5. And it's basically the middle of the month, so let's see if I can make a dent in that as well. This might fail miserably because the camera is balanced on my knees. So hello, hi, checking in, just took a shower, washed my hair because I have a client meeting later today, so I need to look somewhat presentable, but I wanted to update you on finishing Drums of Autumn. It is done. I got through the 170 odd pages of this book, and I will say I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 5-star rating on Goodreads, and it's funny because I was kind of reading through some of the reviews as one does after the fact. Is that just a me thing? It might just be a me thing. But a lot of people who, again, I feel like the Outlander books are just very, like, divisive. Like, you either love them or you hate them. So there are, like, some scathing, like, 2-star reviews. And then there are some glowing, like, 5-star reviews. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me is that quite a few people complained that the beginning of the book was really slow. And I would tend to agree, but only because basically, once you get past that part, it's just non-stop action and things happening. So kind of relative to what happens at the end of the book, the beginning of the book, when they're just settling at Fraser's Ridge and all of that, does seem a little bit like a more leisurely pace, with not a lot of, like, action and activity. But as I said, I really, really enjoyed the book. I still wish that people would just talk like adults to avoid the situation that they got themselves into with Roger being sold off to the Mohawks, and then, like, Claire and Jamie having to go find him and bring him back because Brianna is understandably pissed off that her father is the one to have sold Roger to a bunch of Mohawks going Lord only knows where. So I can kind of understand her, but also at the same time, if you just told him what was going on, might not have happened that way. But they did manage to somehow squeeze in everything with, like, Jamie and Claire leaving Fraser's Ridge to going to find Roger and bring him back into a few hundred pages, I think, if you actually look at it, like, holistically with the book. But in the end, you have a baby, and you have Jamie and Claire being grandparents, which is adorable, and you have a marriage proposal at the gathering in the, I guess, North Carolina version of the Highlands in Scotland. So all really good. But yeah, I think basically, if you are an Outlander fan and you stan Jamie and Claire and you've gotten through the first 3 books and you get to book 4, that you will likely enjoy it because it has a lot of the same stuff that you're dealing with. Obviously, now we're going more into the American history side of things, which always makes me a little bit iffy because American history doesn't really do anything for me, but it's Jamie and Claire. So I think, really, if you are a Outlander fan, you would potentially like this book. But honestly, I don't know how anyone who isn't an Outlander fan could get to book 4 just because they're massive and it takes time. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm interested to see where book 5, Fiery Cross, goes, because now we're kind of like 6 years before, I think, when Jamie and Claire are supposedly dying in a fire. we know that the American Revolution is just around the corner, same as Claire and Jamie, because she's told him, and so it'll be interesting to see. My only like quibble with the book would be that there are a lot of POVs that we're now contending with, and Claire's is always in the first person, but generally when you're dealing with a Jamie or Roger or Brianna, it's more in that third person narrative, and sometimes that shift can be a little jarring if you're not ready for it. So that, and that's something that was happening in earlier books too, once they started including other POVs. I mean, it's definitely becoming more prevalent now because Roger and Brianna are becoming part of the story. Um, and I would love to know what people think about that, because I don't. They're being set up as kind of like the younger romantic couple, I guess now because Jamie and Claire are getting older. But I don't personally think I needed 20 somethings or 30 somethings and their love story to become more present in the narrative, because Claire and Jamie are the reason I read these books, not for Roger and Brianna. But that might just be a me thing, possibly. Anyway, that's it for me. I am going to start the Fiery Cross and get that going, and so you'll hear about that in my next Outlander reading vlog. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will chat with you later. Bye.